So we begin on Daf Daled Amid Base. Today's Daf is Daf Hey, and we begin just after the large parentheses in Daf Daled, which is about 10, 12 lines in. And in our Mishnah, we saw machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim of whether or not the kalbon, this additional small coin that was given, is done for each transaction and each person, or for each person, or for the per transaction. And so if somebody pays a full shekel for two people, they only have to pay one additional kalbon. So Masnita de Rabbi Meir, this Mishnah of Rabbi Meir, meaning the teaching of Rabbi Meir, who says that you have to pay the two extra coins. This is based on Rabbi Meir's understanding that the kalbon is not, as we had said before, an additional coin in order to pay for the extra transactions of needing to trade the smaller coins into a larger coin in order to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. The Amar Rabbi Meir says, "Kashem sheshikol Torah kach kalbon Torah." So just as there's a mitzvah from the Torah to give the shekel, so too is the kalbon, the additional coin, a Torah obligation. Because Kasavar Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that even if you gave a complete amount, that you gave the correct amount, nevertheless, a full shekel, nevertheless you have to give a kalbon, an extra amount, this small coin. And what's the reason for that? The Amar Rabbi Meir, Kashem, Kamin matbei shalei shoytz hakadosh baruch hu metachas kisei kavoday mehareu l'Moshe. V'amar le zeh yitnu. The Torah says zeh yitnu, this shall you give. That means that Hashem showed Moshe a coin of what needs to be given, a very specific amount. So there's something about a fiery coin that Hashem took out from underneath the throne, whatever that means. There's a lot of teaching in that. But the idea is that when Hashem said zeh yitnu, it's specific. This shall you give. There's a specific amount, and the coin has to have a specific weight. And if it's off by a tiny bit, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. And so, kazeh yitnu, you have to give this amount. So you give such a coin plus the additional kalbon in order to make sure that you're not missing any amount. Because as opposed to coinage today, which really is not the value, but rather just it's just a symbol of an amount of money, like a dollar bill. So too coins, but whereas in their day it actually weighed a certain amount, and if it was off by a gram, a milligram, you're off of the mitzvah. And so the kalbon is a Torah obligation to ensure the mitzvah itself. So we had the first opinion, which we were learning, which we went with yesterday, and the idea that it's really a service fee, because they're going to have to, or there's an expense, an additional expense of changing the coins up to a larger coin, and so everybody gives an extra kalbon. Rabbi Meir actually says it's a Torah obligation on account of the shekel itself, and so therefore it doesn't make a difference if you gave a full shekel or you paid for another person as well. You're going to have to give a kalbon for each. Nosan sela litil shekel chayv shtel kalbonis. So in our Mishnah, there was another scenario, and now we're going to have to see, is this Rabbi Meir's opinion or the Chachamim's opinion? Nosan sela. So he gave a full shekel, litil shekel, in order to take a half shekel in return as a change. So he has to pay a half shekel. He gives a full and takes half as change. Chayiv shtel kabonus. And the Mishnah says he's obligated in two kalbon. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Lazar says, oh, this must be the opinion of Rabbi Meir, because he's giving two coins. He's going to have to take two coins. And he's giving a coin and getting back a coin. So for each one, he has to make sure that there is no extra, there's no loss, and therefore he has to pay extra kalbon to make sure there's no difference. Netanya, El Chayav Mekalbin. And in our Mishnah, it said that who's obligated in a kalbon, and if one person pays a full shekel for two people, And then he only has to give one kalban echad, but Rameim and base kalbanos, and Rameim says 2. So to over here, each coin that he gave the full shekel. Maybe it's missing a little bit of the silver, and so he has to give a kalban to make sure that he's at the right amount. And then he takes a half shekel back. Maybe that's overpriced or has a little more weight, and so he has to give a kalban back. So he would have to give 2. That's the understanding. Amar Rav. So Rav said, Rav says, no, even the Chachamim are going to say that you have to give 2 coins here for this case. The Amar Rabbi Meir, echad shekel shu noisem, echad shekel shu noitel, ve'echad lo divrei Torah. Because Rabbi Meir says that 1 for the Torah obligation of the kalban and 1 for each coin that he gave and took. So you see that according to Rabbi Meir, you need 3 coins. So I'll the Rav Gimel Kabanis. So which tells us that according to Rav, according to Rabbi Meir, there actually are 3 coins to give. 1 for the shekel that he gave, maybe it wasn't the right amount. 1 for the shekel that he took back, maybe it wasn't the right amount. And 1 because of the Torah obligation to give a kalban, as we saw. And according to the Chachamim, then you're going to give 2. 1 for the transaction fee of the shekel he's giving, because that's going to have to be traded up, and 1 for the saving that he got, that he's trading, that he's getting change. So there's a fee for that, and so he's going to give 2 kalbanos even for the chacham. Also, Rabbi Yirmiyah, when Rabbi Yirmiyah came, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak b'shem Rav, that he said that the Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak said in the name of Rav, that indeed there are these 3 coins that the kalban, according to Rabbi Meir, echad shekel shu noising, 1 for the shekel that he's giving, ve'echad shekel shu noitel, 1 for the one that he's taking, ve'echad l'dvar Torah, 1 for the Torah obligation. The Mishnah had set a case where brothers had inherited. Okay, so we have the heirs that inherited an estate, and from the estate they're paying their half shekel. So since if it's still in the prior to splitting their inheritance, so they're being paid by the estate, which is a separate entity. And as we saw in the Mishnah, when one person pays the half shekel for another person, then they don't have to pay the kalban. So to here, the estate paying for each one of the heirs is going to be exempt of the kalban because it's still an estate. It hasn't yet been an inheritance. Once it becomes an inheritance where they each inherit and then they're partners, or if they split their inheritance, so at that point they're each paying for themselves. If they join together again as a partnership, then it doesn't go back to being an estate. Now it's a partnership of the heirs, and actually they'd be exempt of whatever you're exempt of when you're a partner, and they'd be obligated and everything that they pay for themselves, which was the case in our Mishnah, which we said that tithing of the firstborn would be exempt, but not the firstborn, tithing of the new herd, the Ma'aser Behema, and the halacha of the Ma'aser Behema is as well that if you purchase newborn animals, even if it's 10 of them, you don't have to give a Ma'aser Behema, the 10th one, go to Ma'aser, to the tithe, because it's purchased. So when the brothers split their inheritance, is that a purchase, or is that a backward definition, a retroactive definition of the inheritance, which is breira? Breira would be is that later each brother decides that when they inherited what it was that they had inherited. And so that would then be so we could see the brothers sort of being an acquisition from each other, or we can see that it's not an acquisition from each other. It's a retroactive definition of what the inheritance was, and that would be the term breira that we've seen before. John loves it, which is the idea of you have a retroactive definition today, you define what you inherited a month ago. So achin, brothers, vashutvin, and partners, if they're still in a state where they are obligated or if they're already in a state that they're obligated in the kalba, meaning each one is paying for themselves, meaning it's not longer in a state anymore, but each one has now fully inherited. So they're obligated in the kalban. However, Peturim and Maisa Behema, they're going to be exempt of Maisa Behema, which is the state that they already split. So they each one owns their own b'shechalku. They split the inheritance. Each one owns their own property and their own assets, and therefore they're paying their half shekel for themselves. But they brought it back together as partners, so now they're regular partners, even though that it came from the estate. But they're now, since they're partners at this point, so they're going to be exempt of the tithing of the new herd. The Ma'aser Behema is going to be exempt. However, if they're obligated Ma'aser Behema, meaning they're not partners, it's still money of the estate, the single owner, the previous owner. So then they're going to be exempt of the kalban because someone else, the estate, is paying for them. And that's B'Shalei Chilku, where they never split the inheritance yet. Amar Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar said, that this din that we said, that brothers are considered partners and they're therefore exempt from tithing the animals. It's talking about where they actually the father had a whole herd, young kids and older billy goats, and which are called teyashim, and they split them and said, look, you take 5 of the adult goats, the bucks. I'll take 9 of the young kids, and that's a swap. So the value may be the same, but there are different parts. And so since each one was really worthy of the full amount, each one should have had a full partnership in the goats and in the young goats and the older goats. And so this is sort of a buyout that each one is doing of each other. Yeah, but so essentially they bought each other out. When they say, look, I'll take a few of the bigger ones and that value is more, and you take more of the smaller ones. So the Gedim Keneged Tiyashim and Tiyashim Keneged Gedim, where it's the bucks for the kids and the kids for the bucks, and so they're essentially purchasing from each other. And when they partner again, they're going to be exempt from the tithing because they're buying it off each other, and it's considered lakuach. It's considered purchased as opposed to your own assets. Aval im chalku gedim keregedim at yashim kereged. But if they simply split the asset equally down the middle, 5 kids for you and 5 kids for you, and $3 for you and $3 for you. So this way, they're actually split it equally. So then we're just saying brera. We're saying that that's just a definition retroactively at the time of the inheritance. What was mine? What was yours? It's not a new acquisition and a swap of assets. I'll give you a few of mine for a few of yours. It's a split right down the middle. So that's just a definition. This is just defining what was yours from the beginning, and it doesn't count as having acquired anything, and therefore you're not exempt of the tithe of the meiser because this is not lakuach. This is not something you purchased from the other heirs by a swap. It's actually just your inheritance from the start, and when they were born, when these young were born, they were essentially yours, and you can't say. that it's considered you acquired this. And then when you partner together, so then it's going to be exempt on account of partnership. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, however, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, and he says that regardless of how they split the inheritance, whether they split it equal, or whether you say that they split it sort of as a swap and a buyout, nevertheless, it's going to count as they acquired it from each other, because he doesn't hold of Berera. So he says you can't retroactively define what was yours. The inheritance was an entire inheritance. Each one of the heirs has the rights to the entire thing, and then you're essentially buying each other out. Regardless of how you split it, whether it's equal, one newborn kid for another newborn kid. Okay, but I had rights to half of that one, and you had rights to half of this one, and so we're sort of buying each other out. In any case, it's not just a retroactive definition, because it doesn't hold a brera. So they're going to be exempt of the meiser, of the tithe, even what was born after the death and the inheritance, on account of that it's lekuach, it's purchased from the other. And from here on, it's going to count as a partnership, and it's going to be exempt. Kahida tanan taman, like we learned over there, halakuach, any animal that you purchase in the market after it's born, mishanita, or anything you received as a gift, b'matana, patim and amaisa. That's going to be exempt of the maisa behema, because the Torah says the firstborn of your animal you will give to me. Also, that which is done for your same shall you do for the animals. So you see that the idea of what is born to you, that it has to be that it is born in your herd, and not what you purchase afterwards. So we have machlokas over here, whether we say brera, whether we say retroactive definition of what's your inheritance, or that every inheritance, essentially, if it's split between several heirs, is an acquisition from the other heir, swap my part for your part. Rabbi Chia Amar. So Rabbi Chia says, Rabbi Yirmiyah Bai. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, based on our Mishnah said that basically that they're dependent on each other, these two halachas. If you're obligated in the kalbon, meaning you're paying for yourself, which means that the assets are already yours. Well, if that's the case, so then you've already inherited, and the inheritance has been split, divvied out between all the heirs, and you're now a partner with someone else. So you're going to be exempt. That's a new partnership, and you're exempt from the tithe from meiser. Whereas if you are exempt of the kalba, meaning that the old estate, the estate of the deceased, is that is a single entity paying for your meiser, paying for your shekel, and therefore they're exempt of the kalban, of the additional fee, because they're not paying for themselves, they're paying for someone else. And which by definition means that you're not a partner with the other heirs in the assets, because it's not your asset yet. It still belongs to the one single entity, the estate, and therefore you're obligated in meiser, you're obligated in tithing the new herd, because it's a single entity, it's not a partnership. Well, actually, he says, why isn't that we say that sometimes there could be an obligation in both the kalbon, the extra coin, meaning you're paying for yourself for the shekel, and also at the same time you're obligated in the meiser, because the animals still belong to the estate. And the same the other way around, you'd be exempt from both. Hey Chavida. And what would be that scenario? And we skip the parentheses, and the Gemara explains. It would be where they already split and divvied out the assets, all the other assets, including the money. But they never split the estate's herd. So the estate still owns the herd. It's a single entity, not a partnership, and therefore you have to pay for the meiser. You have to tithe the new herd, because there's no partnership, because you haven't divvied it out yet. Whereas in the assets of paying the cash liquid funds, which you're paying the shekel from, that is already in your hands. That's something that you're paying for yourself, and you have to pay the kalban. And so you'd be obligated in the kalban the extra fee, because that asset is already yours. You're paying cash yourself, whereas the herd is not yet yours. It still belongs to the estate, and so you're obligated in ma'aseh behema. Or vice versa. You already split the animals, and the herd has already been split between all of the ears. So you're now partners in this herd, because you've already inherited that, and you're partners. And as a partner, you'd be exempt of ma'aseh behema, the tithe of the newborn herd. But you've never split, and you never split the assets. So you're not paying yourself for the shekel. You're not paying for yourself to the shekel donation, but rather the estate is paying for you, and so it's exempt of the kalban, of the additional fee. So patur mizem is that would be a scenario where you're exempt from both. Amar Ramana Hadadat Amar. So Ramana said this, that you're saying that if you split the animals and not the assets, you'll be exempt. Yeah, that's only true. That would be true if the animal isn't the herd is not the majority of the estate's assets. However, if the herd is the majority of the asset, having split the herd is essentially splitting the entire inheritance. Rabbi Avin Omar, Rabbi Avin said, Rabbi Shammai Boy, that Rabbi Shammai asked the question, what's the reason for the exemption where they haven't split the inheritance yet? If they haven't split the inheritance yet, right? Because you're considering it, they haven't split the assets, so the estate is considered a single entity, one person. Eitzel ma'aser behema, and so therefore, for ma'aser behema, then you can't say it's about partnership, and therefore you're exempt of the tithe, the 10th animal of the newborn herd. Actually, it's one entity. It's the estate's entity, and therefore you also ad patrim min hakalban, and that's the reason you're exempt of the kalban, paying the estate and paying the extra fee, because it's the estate paying your shekel. It's not you paying your shekel. Someone else is paying on your behalf. Amrulay. And what's bothering him is that you shouldn't have exempted him of the kalban on account of that. Ultimately, he's paying out of an estate that's going to be his, and so he's paying for himself. Amalei Lishanya. So they said to him, Lishanya Shahum Noisin Sela Echad Shlema. The asset that belongs to the father that's in the estate. So the estate account money is there. Is paying for the estate fund is paying for all of them, and therefore in other words, he was bothered by that. This is a leniency, and you're getting away from. They're getting away paying for their own shekel, and they're exempting themselves from the kalban, from funds that are theirs, and the Chachamim's response is, don't you see a distinction of an estate, which is in halach it's called tfusas habayis. It's still the estate. It has never been split, and so it isn't their funds yet. So even though that they will eventually have the access to it, and even though that from that fund they're paying up an obligation they have right now, but in reality, the fact of the matter is that it is still the estate's money. It hasn't been divvied yet, It belongs to another entity, and that's the exception. Now the Gemara asks, Miata, if that's the case, that this is an estate fund, even if they split the estate and then they join together as partners, they shouldn't be considered partners. They should be obligated in the tithe of the 10th animal from the newborn herd, because they're not partners. It's the estate's fund. And they'd be exempt of the kalban, because even if they split the estate, but now that they come back as partners, it should be considered the estate's entity. It should be exempt. So the Gemara says, why don't we say that if you see the estate as a separate entity, even after they split, if they come back together again, it should be considered the estate? The Gemara doesn't answer this, but obviously the distinction is clear that once they've split it already, it's no longer the estate. Now they're just a partnership. The Gemara didn't feel that it had to answer that question, because that's obviously the distinction between the estate that has never been split, and once it's been split, and they come together as partners. Rabbi Abba B'Shem Rabbi Abba Bar Rav Huna, Hishnei Achin Sheyarshu Es Aviyah, says that this is the just as we see the halacha, that when there are people that inherit their father, or heirs that inherit, that they're obligated, that while it's still the estate paying, that they're exempt of the kalban, but they're obligated in the tithe. The same would be true by brothers-in-law inheriting their father-in-law. That means that their wives are sisters, and they inherit their father as the only two children, and the husbands, as a part of the ksuba, the arrangement is that what they inherit, which would be the asset, belongs to the wife, but in the fructus of this asset, the funds that come from the asset, go into the marriage, and so that would be access to him to pay his kalban, to pay his shekel from that inheritance. So the Gemara says that this would be a halacha that where the sons-in-law are equal to the sons in this way, that they can pay the shekel from there. But since it's still an estate, they would exempt themselves of the kalban, the additional fee. So now the Gemara says, okay, based on all this, that we see that there's the extra fee, the extra small coin that everybody would have to pay, unless you're coming from an estate. Where would these funds go? So Rabbi Meir says that this is a Torah obligation, says, well, it goes to the same place where the shekel goes, because this is the same mitzvah. However, Rabbi Lezer says, no, it goes as a gift unto the Mizbeach, meaning that it's excess in karbanos to the Mizbeach. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri Aimer, it would be used for the gold plating of the various parts of the Beis Hamikdash and the Holy of Holies. Ben Azai says, Ben Azai says, no, you're forgetting the main purpose of this. This was a fee for the bankers who would trade these small coins up for larger coins and take a fee, and all the money would go into that fee. That's what it would cover. Some say no, that the funds would go to pay for the road work to help people come to Yerushalayim. With this, we complete the first parak of Shekalim Bechad Adar. We should come back to you as Hashem Yisparach. The Mishnah says now the obligations of who would be responsible for bringing the coins to Yerushalayim, how they would handle it, and so on. So essentially, one person would be the gabai, the designated person to gather all the coins in their town, in their city, in their village, wherever it was, and now they had a lot of coins, and so they wouldn't want to travel with, I don't know, 100 half shekel coins, so they would swap it up to the larger coins. So mitzdarfin shkolim l'dar koines. They would join all these coins together into a larger coin, because of the travel, the carrying it through the travel. Now, and the way there was basically a deposit box, which was a large chest that had like a shofar like imagery. Basically, it curved out and it had a slot for the coin to go in, but nobody would be able to put their hand in and take change out. So this way, nobody can cheat. Everybody puts their coin in. So just as you had this deposit box, this what they called shofars, a shofar-like deposit box in the Beis HaMikdash for people to drop off their coins, so too in every city they would have them. Now, what would happen if the city people, everybody gave their half shekel, so they gathered, let's say, 200 half shekel, and they send one person, say, please carry this into the big city or to Yerushalayim. And now they got robbed and it was stolen or lost. Now, so if if it's already the first day of Nisan, and in Yerushalayim they emptied the chest already that was in the Beis HaMikdash, that's called the teruma was taken, and in that case, actually the kohen taking those funds at the Beis HaMikdash would intend to sanctify all the coins that were already collected on the way, as the Gemara can explain. And therefore, these coins that were prior to being stolen were already sanctified and as if they were delivered. And so all of this person has to do is swear to the Gizbar and to the Beis HaMikdash, say, look, I swear that I had honestly and faithfully kept these coins and I was robbed, or without negligence they were lost, and he's exempt. Vim lav, however, if it's not the first of Nisan, and so the coins had not yet been gathered in the Beis HaMikdash, so he has to go back to his village people, nishban l'bnei ha'ir, that he has to go back and take an oath to them that he was not negligent and did not steal it. And the city people would have to now replace these coins. Everybody would have to pay a tax a second time, this half shekel. Nimtzu oishech ziran haganavim elu ve'elu shkalim me'ein oilin. So nimtzu oishech ziran ganavim. If you find the coins, or the thieves were caught and they returned it. So both the new coins that the city had paid, the people of the city had paid, as well as the old coins are going to be shekel. They're going to be holy, sanctified. And they can't say, look, I'm exempt next year because I paid this year twice. So the Gemara says, okay, great. So they would trade it up to the larger gold coin. Why wouldn't they trade it up to even more expensive? And then they only have to carry one gem. Shema tells about Goliath, because gems can fluctuate. When hektish mafsid, and hektish would lose, and so gold was more stable commodity. Kahida tanina and taman, like we learned over there. This is in regards to Bechor, in regards to the firstborn, as a mission Bechor, the redemption of the firstborn, v'kulan, and all of these redemptions that would be done for Bechor, the firstborn, or hektish, or any type of hektish, nifta mekesef or shavakesef, we could use silver or anything that can be traded for silver, chutz mishkalim, but you cannot use shekel, but because it has to be besides for the shekel, by our subject matter, the half shekel that you have to give, that you cannot redeem it with shaveh kesef, with some asset worth silver. It has to be the coins itself. By shekel, you cannot use a gem or a vessel. And you cannot use vessels for redemptions. And Gemara says, is that really true? But Amar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yitzchak Shem that he says the reason for this is Shem Yazila Kelim Menimsa Hektash Mafse. The reason is because, again, like we said, the vessels, just like the gems, could decrease in value, and hekdesh is going to lose out. So too, the coins, the gems, the hekdesh will lose out. But whereas coinage is considered a more, because it's based on its silver weight or its gold weight, it's considered more stable commodity. So the Gemara says, Masnita, our Mishnah, which says that the coins were then traded up to a larger gold coin and brought in, betaklin chadatin. This is talking about where it's new coins that were gathered in Adar for the new year. Avataklin atikin, but if it's last year's tax, meaning when they're paying up an old debt of the shekel tax, like so there we don't say this halacha. There you can even trade it up for coins, as for gems, and the reason is because the old coins were not used. All the leftover coins from previous years or old debt that a certain village never paid up and never paid their tax, and now they're paying their tax from previous years. So all that's not used for this year's Beis Hamikdash for the karbanos. So the hekdesh will not lose out. Rather, it's used. The remainder of the coins are used for roadworks and other city needs, and therefore for that we're not concerned that it'll actually end up being worth less, because that's the investment that you always have. 1 second, John. You always have, whenever you do works, that fluctuates, and so the trading up for a gem and its fluctuation in market price is not going to be a loss to hekdesh, because that's just the market, because you're in market value, because you're doing market work, you're building. And that's all that needs supplies. So you're always in a fluctuating market. And John asked, what about the coins getting old? Do you mean that the stamp of the coin, meaning the impression of the coin, is going to no longer be valuable because of a change of regime?
Yeah, we've seen a number of places where, sometimes if a coin is old, a money trader won't accept it or something like that.
Right, so that
because it gets worn.
Right. Oh, the worn part. So
yeah.
Yes, the worn is why you give the kalbon, right? We saw that because maybe it's worth less. That's a part of the kalbon, according to Rabbi Meir, at least, that some of the coin is going to be devalued in as much as that it doesn't have the 5 milligrams, whatever it is that it's supposed to have. Because in time, little by little, it gets worn out. So that you're adding the kalbon for. The change of regime, so it had the coinage had one king on it, and now that king is deposed and it's a new and someone else it's someone else's reign, and they make new coins. Sometimes the coin is simply out of use, and that would be a loss as well. But that's as long as when it was donated, it was a proper coin, it was going to be okay. We'll see. But Tanya King, so we learn similarly this idea that the coins were used, that old shekel obligations, atikin, the old shekel obligations, b'mikdash, vein atikin b'medina, that the old coins were only in the mikdash and not in the Medina, not in the countryside, not in the cities. So they would not gather small coins; they would have to then trade them up. And it would become a commodity. So our Mishnah has said that the person that brought the coins is going to be exempt if he takes an oath. So that must be he was not paid for bringing the coins, because and we'll do this as an introduction to this next sugya. We know that there are shomrin halachas of someone who takes responsibility, a custodial responsibility for something deposited by them. You can be a shomer chinam, somebody who's an unpaid custodian. This unpaid custodian is obligated in obviously not being negligent in peshia, but as if any loss happens with a lack of negligence, theft, armed robbery, a loss of some sort, they're going to be exempt. All they have to do is take an oath that I watched it in a normal way, and they will be exempt. That's a shemachinam because they're not being paid for it. Whereas shema sachar, if they're a paid custodian, then they have to pay. Then they would have to be held responsible for even theft and loss, as long as it wasn't armed robbery. So in our Mishnah, the Gemara says, "Masnita b'shemachinam." Our Mishnah must be talking about that he's a shemachinam, is an unpaid custodian. But if he's a paid custodian, then we wouldn't have this halacha because he would have to pay up whatever he lost. It could even be a shema and in our Mishnah that it said that if it was stolen, that would not mean regular stolen, but rather armed robbery, where he's actually exempt, or avdu. This is what we said that he lost it. It's not talking about a regular loss. It would be where his barge, his ship, that he was a boat that he was bringing it over the river sunk. So these are exemptions where he would actually be exempt, and that's why an oath, taking a shavua, is going to be sufficient. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Simon, Asya command Amar Termin Alagav. You know what? We'll leave it at this, and Bez Hashem, we'll continue the halachas of who's responsible on Yantiv, on Shabbos afternoon in Yantiv, and just some housekeeping.